Brielle, thank you so much for joining us here today. Now, your team has been investigating birth alerts for a number of years now, so can you fill us in with the latest in this story?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to be clear, I'm no longer with the IndigiNews team, but I've been working on this as a freelancer and have a good relationship with the folks on the IndigiNews team. And so the latest in the story is, ever since we broke the story in 2021 that the BC government had characterized its own practice as illegal and unconstitutional. When we broke that in 2021, we followed up with a number of freedom of information requests trying to get more information about this. And we filed it with a number of ministries that are involved in BC, including the Ministry of Children and Family Development, the Attorney General's Office, and the Citizen Services, which handles privacy complaints from citizens, which is very much at the heart of the birth alerts. And it took a long time to get information back. And when we received this information, there were whole pages redacted. There was lots of information that just wasn't, that was blacked out, and we weren't clear on what was missing. And so over the last couple of years, we've been pushing to have more of that information revealed by appealing to the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner in BC. And so this is just one records package out of 3 that the Privacy Commissioner's Office is currently investigating about birth alerts.
So did the province explain why they wanted these documents back at all?
Yeah, so they said that the information around their characterization of these birth alerts as illegal and unconstitutional had been released in error, and that should have been subject to solicitor-client privilege or advice from their internal advice from lawyers. But the IndigiNews team felt very strongly that it was very much in the public interest for the public to know that the government had called these illegal and unconstitutional, and we felt like we had a lot of questions around that. So we're still waiting for the government to explain whether they're going to notify the hundreds of parents that have been subjected to birth alerts in recent years, that they have been subjected to these alerts and that their privacy was violated. They haven't answered that question about whether they're going to notify parents, whether they're going to apologize to them. And that's something that Indigenous leaders have called for, and that the representative for children and youth in BC has called for.
Well, see, on the subject of returning the documents, what was your and the IndigiNews team's response, to being asked to return those documents?
Well, we consulted with our lawyer, and our lawyer assured us that we had a constitutional right to publish this information. And so we responded to MCFD and the Attorney General's Office with that information, saying we have a right to publish. We feel like it's very much in the public interest to know this, and we're not going to return the information.
And so you just mentioned my last question for you here. Now that the dispute is heading for the BC Supreme Court, what are the greater implications for press freedom here?
Well, I've had to nerd out on this a lot, and this is something that I'm learning about as we go. And in BC, we have freedom of information, the FIPA is our privacy law. And under privacy law in BC, there's something called Section 25, and that's a public interest override. And so when we got this information back and it was full of blacked out information, we asked the Privacy Commissioner's Office to apply Section 25, which is a public interest override. So even though MCFD was saying, this should be covered under solicitor-client privilege, this shouldn't be revealed because of solicitor-client privilege, we said public interest should trump that. And so we're asking the Privacy Commissioner to make a decision around that. But what's really interesting is that MCFD, or the Ministry of Children and Family Development, is refusing to share the unredacted information with the Privacy Commissioner so that they can look at it and decide whether it's in the public interest that this particular part of the records be made public. So I know that's convoluted, but basically the ministry is not letting this independent oversight body review the information so that they can make a decision, and that's why we're going to BC Supreme Court.
Well, certainly plenty to look ahead to with the story as well. But Brielle, we'll have to leave it there, but I want to say thank you, miigwech, to you for coming on, and great work by you and the IndigiNews team on this story.
Thanks so much, Daryl.